Okay, everybody, we are here once again. Philosophy for the people. Dr. Jim Madden, the professor, is here, and he's going to lead us through a new series on Wilfrid Sellars' Philosophy and the Scientific Image of Man. He's got a new post up, which will itself be a series over at his Substack. That's JD Madden's Substack, and we have it up here on the screen. This is going to be our guide for today's conversation. So, Professor, if you don't mind, set the stage for us. What inspired you to do this series on Sellars, and what can the gentle listener expect to get out of it here on the podcast and from your Substack as well?
First of all, I have to have a caveat. Actually, just my coffee machine died overnight last night, so I woke up this morning to no coffee.
No, don't say it.
I had to run out to a certain fast food chain that has done grave damage to the health of our country.
Tell us the name.
McDonald's.
not actually the worst coffee in the world, though. Honestly.
No, I know. And I got myself a large McDonald's coffee.
Right.
I got my wife a small McDonald's coffee. She didn't finish it, so I'm finishing the last of her cold McDonald's coffee. Just holding on. I'm doing this for the people, though.
Yeah. So before we get into this, is an important topic. Like, what is the best desperation coffee? Because we're all in those situations. Coffee machine dies. You forgot to buy the good stuff. So, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Starbucks is completely out for it. I actually think that their coffee is just undrinkable. It's so acidic and so nasty. I really can't drink it. Yeah. McDonald's, if there's nothing else, I'll take it. But actually, Chick-fil-A. Not horrible. So Chick-fil-A is usually my go-to desperation coffee spot.
I was once pleasantly surprised by a coffee from Burger King.
Man, I would be so scared.
Yeah, but it could just be that my expectations were so low.
Yeah,
of what coffee. I'll tell you. Do you know of it? Do you up in the Great North, in the homeland, as I refer to it, or
indeed,
Cana, really?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the Scooters up there? A coffee chain called Scooters?
Not that I know of. Not that I've ever encountered. We have Quick Trip.
You have Quick Trip, yeah. So Scooters it's just drive-through coffee chain.
Okay.
That they're in this Missouri, Kansas area where I live,
mm-hmm.
and I tell you that I think that's your best takeout coffee that I've had. Yeah.
Wow. All right, people. Well, there you go. You didn't pay for it, but you got it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Scooters. If you're listening, we're interested in any kind of promotional deal you're looking to have, right? So
we are susceptible to bribes, as you know.
Yeah.
All right. So good disclaimer, important, and
distract us with that. Right.
So Wilfrid Sellars, tell us about this guy.
So why did I decide to do this? It was our last. I think it was our last time we were together. Inspired me to do this because we did that sort of what's an introduction to the philosophy of mind.
Yeah, we're going to finish that too. By the way, we will do the dualistic side here at some point.
Yeah, mm-hmm. or I mean, in some ways, we want to talk about this. What I have in mind here might actually supersede that.
Yeah. Here, let me make our faces just a little bit bigger until we go into the real deal here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Although she's more pleasant to look at than us.
Immensely so.
Yeah. So I after we did that podcast, I thought, oh man, I don't know. I just don't feel like I nailed that. And really, how would I at this point in my life introduce the philosophy of mind? And as I thought about it, I would probably really introduce it now using Wilfrid Sellars' Philosophy in the Scientific Image of Man. This essay that Sellars wrote, I think in 1960, right? Mm-hmm. And so that led me to pull my. And this is an old school philosophy book here. I bought this book in 1996, my first year in graduate school, right?
I love it, dude.
And I dusted that thing off the shelf and, just opened up to the first paragraph of Philosophy and Scientific Image of Man. I just got sucked into it and just spent the weekend just really combing through that essay.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what, really, let's do it. Let's go ahead and let's introduce the philosophy of mind using Wilfrid Sellars' Philosophy and Scientific Image of Man.
Yeah,
right.
Perfect.
And partly because, and this I do get in this in the essay that I wrote about it, is the Sellars' prey that he's stalking in that essay is much bigger than just philosophy of mind, or it might. I think maybe what we'll see as the essay unfolds, Sellars' essays unfold, is that for Sellars, all philosophy is philosophy of mind if you understand philosophy of mind the way he does.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. His canonical, the essay, it's really basically a small book that Sellars is most known for, is Empiricism and the Philosophy of Mind. I think if we were just interested in getting Sellars right, we would work through that. Okay. Mm-hmm. but it's not just Sellars. I want to get it. It's sort of like I want to get philosophy of mind right, and I want to get kind of like how to think about philosophy the way Sellars does. It's more or less kind of how I think about it too.
Yeah,
right?
awesome.
So I see philosophy and scientific image of man is this interesting thing. It operates as an introduction to philosophy of mind, and it also kind of it operates as an introduction to philosophy as such. Okay, and at the same time, it operates at the level of actually coming to some substantive philosophical kinds of conclusions too.
Yeah. Multiple birds, one stone.
Yeah, exactly. Which aren't necessarily, that's not necessarily Sellar's first goal in it, but he hints at some things, right?
Yeah.
So, and also, so it serves as this very good introduction to philosophy of mind in a more pedestrian sense, because as we'll see, the cast of characters that Sellars develops in the essay, I mean, I think basically it exhausts the in the broad sense, the positions that are still extant in philosophy of mind today. You know, we'll see the reductive physicalist will show up as a character in Sellar's drama. We'll see the eliminative materialist will show up as a character in Sellar's drama. We'll see the emergentist will show up in Sellar's drama. We'll see, actually, I think you can even see there's a hint of panpsychism that's discussed points. So I really don't think in principle, in the broad sense, categorically, right? I don't think the philosophy of mind has advanced categorically beyond what Sellars predicted for it in 1960. There's been developments within the categories, right? There's more or less sophisticated versions of, say, reductive materialism, or more or less sophisticated versions of emergentism have come about. But I think the basic categories that Sellars lays out in this essay are pretty much extant still today.
Yeah.
Right?
Excellent.
Yeah. And so that's why I thought this would be a pretty good exercise for us to do. Right. So I basically wrote the Substack with the thought, like, we could use the Substack to kind of support philosophy for the people.
Yeah, excellent. Well, here we are, happy to do it, and this will be an excellent tie-in to the previous episode. By the way, I thought you actually did an excellent job in that introduction episode. But we know that Jim holds himself to an extremely high standard.
Extremely high standard, yeah.
So here we are.
Nothing but excellence.
Yeah, hey,
that's good. It's not that I don't think I made some error. I thought about, had I really thought through how I would do it now.
Yeah, which I didn't give you a chance. I literally just pulled you on the podcast and was like, "Go."
That's our MO, man. Right? That's how we roll. I think
that's what we do.
I think that's not advice of what we do, actually.
Yeah. No, we're all about. I love. We're gonna get into it here in a minute, but what makes this podcast so enjoyable to me, at least when we jam around, is we just jam. Right? We come on here and we jam in the same way that we would, like, if you were just at my house hanging out. Right. So that to me is where the magic really happens. So this one will be a little bit different because Jim actually has written something in advance, but I'm sure we'll have
something like a plan to this.
Yeah. It was something like a plan this time. So let's bring it back up, Jim, and you can start walking us through this, this beautiful creation of yours. So here's the art that you always have nice art on your Substack. So let's you just tell me when to scroll and I'll scroll.
Yeah, so let's scroll down here. I'm looking at on my screen too. So actually let me just say some things about what Sellars is up to here. Okay. Sure. So I point out in the essay, it's funny, I have that my essay is about Sellars' essay, so it's going to be confusing, but I say, right, that one of the reasons I find philosophy and scientific image of man interesting is because the way Sellars is going to think about philosophy of mind is different than I think a lot of, especially our audience, thinks about philosophy of mind. Okay. And that has a lot to do with how he thinks about philosophy too. Okay. And that's why we get the first section of the essay, which is all we're going to discuss today, is Sellars' meta-philosophy. Okay. But going back to more specifically the philosophy of mind, Sellars doesn't see the issue of the mind-body problem as per se the issue in philosophy of mind. He sees that more as a symptom of a deeper problem. Okay. And what I mean by this is whether or not we have to adopt a materialist ontology or a dualist ontology, okay, or an idealist ontology, right, and Sellars doesn't dismiss the importance of those kinds of questions, but he sees it as secondary to a different kind of question. Okay. And so you're not going to directly see Sellars take up naturalism versus theism or something like that. Okay.
Yep.
And it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think he's right that there is a kind of more fundamental question to be asked. Okay.
Yep.
And we're going to see him work towards articulating that. And that fundamental question that Sellars asks is really, what is it to have distinctively human thinking at all? Okay. That's it. Whatever ontology that requires. Okay. He thinks there's another kind of question we have to ask about that first and foremost. And I think it's just what counts for this, what counts for being a distinctively human thinker. Right.
Yes.
And we'll see in where we're going to go to in directly here is he's wondering what counts for that. Not just human thinking, but any human activity is where he's going to begin. Like, what is it to do something, not just to do it, but to do it in the human way?
Yes.
Okay? And that occasions for Sellars what philosophy is, and then eventually will occasion what philosophy of mind is. Okay.
Right.
All right. And so, and also some things about like Sellars' method, right, is, okay, so first of all, as I put it in the essay, he has a diagnostic project that he's doing. Okay. But that follows first what I call a taxonomic project and a prognosticative project for Sellars. Okay. So diagnostically, he wants to say, here's the trouble. Here's the intellectual itch that we're scratching that leads us eventually to something that you and I today would call the philosophy of mind. Okay.
Yes.
He gets there by first, or I shouldn't say, maybe this is all happening at once in the essay, is he's going to do a taxonomy. So he's going to lay out like what are the possibilities for dealing with that problem. So he's going to give us a diagnosis, like what's the problem, and then he's going to give us a taxonomy of possible solutions to it. Okay, and then he's going to give us along the way, I should say, some prognoses on the likely success of those projects. Okay. And as we'll see, Sellars has mostly fairly grim predictions for where these things are going.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's sort of like, he starts out, he wants to invent philosophy of mind by diagnosing the problem, and then gives it a terminal diagnosis.
Yeah.
Or at least as of yet, right? It's sort of you're kind of holding on to the new drug comes along that might solve this. But I think he's saying as of now, we don't have the resources to deal with this.
Sure.
Okay. And so, and the way he does this is very, very similar to the way Sellars operates in a lot of his other work. It's like Sellars loves to sort of tell these very abstract mythologies almost, right? So in Empiricism and the Philosophy of Mind, one of the most important moments in that book, or most famous moments in that book, or I guess it's an essay, is this, Sellars calls it the myth of Jones and the Rylalian community. Okay. And what he's trying to do there is to give, a speculative, just so history of how a human population could go from having no language referring to internal psychological episodes to how they could go to develop, right, naturally a language of internal episodes without saying they had direct acquaintance with those episodes. Okay. And he does it by like, hey, in the beginning, maybe it went like this, and then it could, and then given it went that way, then it would have to go this way, this way, this way, this way. So you get this sort of interesting thing from Sellars. He has almost like Nietzschean genealogical method, right?
Sure.
Where he's going to give you a speculative history to explain the present. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of ink spilled about that. I think it's fairly interesting. And I think you're getting something similar here too. Sellars is going to say, yeah, here we are in 1960, with starting to have a sense of like really, really deep conceptual problems in the philosophy of mind. And it's looking very difficult to even envision how we would solve these. Okay. And so Sellars is going to try to understand that better by telling this sort of speculative history of how we got to this.
Yes.
Right? Okay. And so what you're getting in part one of Philosophy and Scientific Image of Man is sort of like Genesis 1 for the philosophy of mind in the beginning, right? In the beginning. Okay. And it's even in it's like very history, because it's like we're not even going to actually directly bring up the philosophy of mind. It's like, what is philosophy and like why did it come about? Is the first step in the speculative history here. Okay.
Got it.
And I note in the essay too, and I think this is important, is Sellars, unlike a lot of the like really big names in mid 20th century analytic philosophy, like think of like Quine, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to find Quine very often, if at all, in any way employing the history of philosophy in his arguments,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's almost a disdain for that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas Sellars, like very often, he wrote like some very interesting essays on history of philosophy stuff, but also
Mm-hmm.
in all of his writings, he's like the cast of characters he has are like he refers them back to these sort of archetypical figures in the history of philosophy.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like in just in philosophy and the scientific image of man, you're going to see he's going to identify or associate certain positions with Spinoza, certain positions with Hobbes. Certainly, Descartes is going to show up in this thing. Hegel will show up in this thing. Plato shows up in this thing. And I think Plato's important for understanding Sellars in a way I think people have used. You're going to see Aristotle will have a moment in this essay. Okay, and so you get a sense with like Sellars' sort of predictions for the future of what philosophy of mind is going to be is actually his memory of a past, right? And it seems that like what Sellars is saying is we're just taking another turn to the same dialectic, albeit different, right? But the same dialectical structure that we've seen in the history of philosophy. Like we've seen this movie before, right? And then once again, I find this like important because it does sort of tell us like really the place we should be spending our time as like, followers on of this is really with the great masters, right? Like that's really where the work is done. And I think Sellars really actually agree with that.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Great introduction. Very good.
All right. So without further ado, we'll begin where Sellars begins. Okay.
Begin at beginning. Love it.
Yeah, I've scrolled down. I don't know if the people want to see this or not, to the first big block quote.
Where he defines philosophy for us. Yeah, this is such a money paragraph.
Money paragraph, yeah.
Here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so people can read it a little bit better. If you're watching, if you're just listening, make sure that you go to Jim's Substack to get the full rich experience.
The fullness of the truth. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. What's the name of your Substack again?
The Journal of Absolute Truth. Yeah.
Journal of Absolute Truth. Yeah. Okay, so I'm quoting Sellars here. The aim of philosophy, abstractly formulated, is to understand how things in the broadest possible sense of the term hang together in the broadest possible sense of the term. Under things in the broadest possible sense, I include such radically different items as not only cabbages and kings, but numbers and duties, possibilities and finger snaps, aesthetic experience and death. To achieve success in philosophy would be, to use the contemporary turn of phrase, to know one's way around with respect to all these things, not in that unreflective way in which the centipede of the story knew its way around before it faced the question, how do I walk? But in that reflective way, which means that no intellectual holds are barred. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now, first thing what's cool is Sellars opens up with agreeing with Aristotle, basically. I should have noticed in the essay that being is said in many ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we tend to, not like trained philosophers necessarily, but commonsensically, if you ask somebody to walk into some room and what are the things in the room, what are the beings in the room, you'll only get a counting of the concrete particulars, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no one will mention the events occurring in the room, right? No one will mention the institutions that lead us to building houses with rooms in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one will mention the electrons in the room. No one will mention the colors distinguished from the substances that have the colors in the room. Mm-hmm. And in an actual full inventory of the things that are would include those things, right? Okay.
One would think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You would think, yeah, okay. And so I like how Sellars is saying here is if you're going, what philosophy is first of all, is the broadest accounting of things that there can be. So he begins by defining it in terms of breadth, right?
Yep.
So what is the philosopher going to do? He's going to make sense of a world, not just that has concrete particulars, but a world that has concrete particulars that have properties, right?
Yep.
That have concrete particulars that are in relations, that are concrete particulars that are subject to political institutions like kings, right? Mm-hmm. That are concrete particulars, some that are alive, like cabbages, some that are not. He's going to event among concrete particulars like finger snaps and things like
actions,
that.
Right? Yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah, actions. Okay, and so for Sellars, the question of philosophy in part is what is there, okay, and in the
That's right.
broadest sense of what is there. Okay.
Mhm.
So
The inventory question.
the inventory question. Yeah. Okay. But, and so, and you can see, the resonance of history of philosophy here, because, at least if we read Aristotle in the order that he's been cataloged historically, you start out with categories. What is there? Right?
Yeah. Some would say that metaphysics just is the study of categories.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And a lot of metaphysics has been transacted just exactly that way.
Mhm.
Okay. But so we have to be careful though, because Sellars, and this is going to be the kind of the dual project of the first part here, isn't just saying philosophy is taxonomic. It's not just putting things into categories, right? It's doing so reflectively, right? Such that one knows one's way around, right?
Yeah.
And he says in that distinctively human reflective sense of knowing one's way around. Okay. And that is very important for understanding everything that Wilfrid Sellars ever said, right? It's right there. Okay. So I'm gonna do a little scroll down here, I think, real quick.
I'll follow you, Professor. You just tell me where to go.
Yeah, so we're eventually going to go to that next block quote
from Sellars. Got it.
Yeah. Okay, now, so he says that what is philosophy? It's in a sense of knowing one's way around. Okay, and then he immediately goes to the distinction between knowing how versus knowing that. Okay, and that's somewhat time and place, because that issue of knowing how versus knowing that was a hot issue in mid-century 20th century Anglo-American philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And he actually says, yeah, there is a difference between knowing how to do something and knowing that, this, like, say, specific propositional truths, right? And his example is, one could know how to ride a bicycle without being able to make like clear propositional statements, right, about how one does it, right? You might have no idea in the sense of, I could tell you how to do it, but you could still be able to do it.
Yes.
He even says there's a sense in which someone might be able to do a mathematical proof by rote, right? Without really being able to state what makes the proof operate.
Yeah. Music is another great example where you can, I think, have clear instances of know how without know that, but you could also have instances of know that without know how.
Yeah. And he says it goes the other way too, is that you might know propositionally, this is what would make a bike run. Okay. But have no clue how to ride a bike.
Yeah. Or I might know that all this music theory stuff, but actually suck at composing and we're playing. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he actually thinks you could, be able to state the logical principles that would make a proof operate, but utterly lack the sort of sixth sense creativity of being able to find a proof. Right.
Right.
And if you ever taught logic, you realize that is definitely the case. Okay. Right. Okay. So, but he says, yeah, that's a real thing. That's a distinction. But he thinks at an important point, that distinction breaks down when we come to distinctively human activity. Okay. So let me look at that next paragraph there. Okay. So quoting Sellars, however, this may be, knowing how to do something at the level of characteristically human activity presupposes a great deal of knowledge that, and it is obvious that reflective knowing one's way around in the scheme of things, which is the aim of philosophy, presupposes a great deal of reflective knowledge of truths. Okay. So let's hold there for quoting. So what does he mean there? All right. It's this notion of reflection, of reflectivity. Okay. And he's showing his Kantian cards here in a lot of ways. Okay. And what he's up to here is he's saying, look, any cognitive animal can know how to do things, right? Okay. But it's only a human that we ask, okay, what justifies you in doing it that way? Okay. So humans don't just know how, right? We know that. And distinctive human know-how in Sellars' views ultimately presupposes knowing that. Okay. So what he means is if for a human to do something as a human, they are able to go into what he calls in other places the logical space of reasons with respect to that activity. Okay. So if I know how to ride a bicycle in the distinctively human way of knowing how to ride a bicycle, not only can I get on the bike and make it go, if you ask me, how does that work? Right. Like explain it to me. I can give you a propositional explanation for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you ask me, why are you playing the musical piece that way? It's not just that I know how to play it that way. I know why that's the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm applying, I'm not just doing it, I'm also applying norms to it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Sellars thinks that distinctively human activity presupposes that self-conscious, at least the ability, that self-conscious application of norms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right. So to know one's way around in the distinctively human sense is to be able to know one's way around reflectively, which is to say, I can do it with the self-conscious application of norms, right?
Yes.
I can justify what I'm doing in terms of some sort of standard, right?
Yep.
Right. You don't ask the monkey, why are you doing it that way? Even though you know how to do it.
Even though the monkey can do it. Right. Yeah.
You can do it. But you'll ask a human, why are you doing it that way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so okay. So, and the Sellars' language about that is say, humans are in the space of reasons with regard to their distinctively human activities. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's interesting for Sellars, then you could have humans and non-humans that were, overlapping in the gross actions they're performing or movements they're performing. But there's a difference because the human, when requested, could step back and give you the second order reflective account of why that's the right way to do it, or why I'm doing it that way. Whereas you would say a non-human is unable to do that, as far as we know, right?
Yeah.
Though the octopus is sort of making a case for itself, I'm told. Anyway, so, all right. So does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Clear as mud. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's see where I go next here.
As always, Jim's Substack is a meaty one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, don't get your hopes up for a 10-minute read. Okay, so I'll give you two more quotations next set of block quotes down.
Cool.
See where I'm at. What is characteristic? Right. So I'm quoting Sellars again. So what is characteristic of philosophy is not a special subject matter, but the aim of knowing one's way around with respect to the subject matters of all the special disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
What we must rather say is that the specialist knows his way around in his own neighborhood as his neighborhood, but doesn't know his way around in it in the same way as a part of the landscape as a whole.
Yeah, great.
So Sellars thinks, I'll use my example from my essay. Sellars would say, a chemist, as a chemist, knows his or her way around in the distinctly human way about specific chemical truths, right? So if you go to your chemistry class and you have a chemistry professor, right, and you ask the chemistry professor, why is this the right answer to the problem that you've posed? That chemistry professor, as chemist, can say, because of this. They are in the space of reasons with respect to specific chemical truths.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, the first movement towards philosophy for Sellars is to say what we're moving to, we'll make the movement from the specific scientific or the special sciences, as he puts it, very like typical, like old way of putting it, right? The special sciences. Mm-hmm. Special science towards philosophy, right? What we're moving is we are broadening the scope. We're going to be in the space of reasons, not about just chemistry, okay, or not just about biology or sociology or literary criticism. We're going to be in the space of reasons about all of those things in relation to each other.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we want to know how things fit together as broadly as possible. Well, we've got a science of kings. We've got a science of cabbages, right? We've got a science of finger snaps, I guess, to be physical.
Yeah.
Right. We've got a science of electrons, all that. And the first move towards philosophy is to ask, okay, but how do we, and like those tell us how, plant phenomena hang together broadly, how, finger snap phenomena or king phenomena, political phenomena hang together broadly. But now we're making a move towards, okay, how do those phenomena as studied as this one hang together most generally?
That's right. How does it all hang together? You're right.
How does it all hang together? Okay, so first of all, the non-philosopher for Sellars is not a philosopher because of an insufficient scope, right? Okay, for philosophy. Okay. But also, this is important for Sellars, is the non-philosopher is also, as the non-philosopher, insufficiently reflective. Okay. And this is another example I use a lot, is if you go to your chemistry class and you start asking your chemistry professor, yeah, but what's so great about the scientific method in the first place? Okay. And I'm sure there's like more fine-grained assumptions we have to make to get chemistry off the ground, just beyond just the scientific method. But your chemistry professor would say, hey, great question, kid. I mean, if it's a good professor, that's great. But come to my office hours about that, because we're going beyond what we do in this course, right? Okay. Like, because whether or not the methods of chemistry are good methods is not a question for chemistry, right? It assumes you've taken a second-year stance to chemistry.
Yes.
You're not doing chemistry anymore. You're doing metachemistry, or we might call it the philosophy of
chemistry, right?
Of chemistry, right? You're taking a higher order perspective. You've become reflective, not within the practice about the subject matter of the practice, but now you've become reflective about the practice.
Yes. Okay?
And so Sellars isn't saying you have to have an office in the Department of Philosophy to be a philosopher of chemistry. He's not like, it's not about disciplinary turf, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I hate it when I hate that stuff. Anyway, so
Jim's triggered.
I don't trigger me. Yeah, who cares, right? Okay, right. It's all, I don't care who gets the grant, right? Okay, I don't get grants anyway. All right, so but it's a question of
smashes coffee cup.
Yeah, and I'm not angry about it either. But what Sellars is saying here is, in as much as the chemist takes that second order perspective on chemistry, he or she is no longer acting as chemist, but as philosopher of chemistry.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So then for Sellars, and actually I make a little bit of a deal out of this in the essay. He's actually giving us like basically Hegel's definition of philosophy right there, right? Where Hegel says, what is philosophy? It's the thing that does not take its starting point as a given.
Yes, right.
Okay, so and anytime you say the starting points of this discipline are not a given, that I'm going to reflect on them critically, you've now entered the philosophical mode.
Yeah. Philosophy is really the only discipline that examines the assumptions of everything else and examines its own assumptions, its own stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where we go next. And Sellars goes directly there. He says, well, so what is philosophy doing? It's trying to take the stance of the whole. It's trying to take a stance, trying to produce a reflective vision, a self-critical vision of what? The whole, of how everything fits together, right?
Right, yes.
It may not be adding anything ontically to the things that we're inventorying. It may not be discovering anything, but what it's doing is trying to take a stance that encompasses that whole. Okay.
Yes.
And now, but then philosophy then does seem to have a presupposition that in fact there is a whole to be examined, right?
Yeah, right.
There is an ultimate sense to be made of the whole thing.
That's right. That there is some general summary, right? Because he uses the term synoptic, right? Some general summary that can be given of reality, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of Sellars has these like metaphors, and he just, I think he nauseated people with how often he used them, right? But he often talks about the synoptic vision, the stereoscopic vision, right?
Yeah. I mean, hey, man, once you get a pet analogy or metaphor, do any of us not abuse it to death, right?
Often I talk about Smitty's running with the cough syrup, man.
I hope we get a visit from Smitty again in this episode.
Oh no, and I'm actually parroting Sellars there, right? Because what does the cough syrup do? It knocks Smitty out of the space of reasons, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, you know what I mean? Like, a bottle of Robitussin will put the space of reasons on hold, I'm told.
Yeah,
right. So,
right. Yeah. Hey, man, we all gotta have a good time every now and then.
Yeah. Lighten up, Francis. Right? Anyway, so
Stripes, great.
Yeah. I think that was our first reference to the film Stripes on the show. So
yeah, that's surprising, man. That's such a classic.
It took years to do it. So anyway, so philosophy then, it has to then put into question whether there is a whole on which it can have a stance.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think this kind of like the circular paradoxical nature of this is something Sellars is aware of, and it's part of the story he's telling, is to say, so chemistry falls into philosophy, right, when it questions its basic presupposition. Literary criticism falls into philosophy when it questions its basic presuppositions. But then philosophy too must question its basic presuppositions, right? But it has nothing to fall back into, right?
Yeah.
So it is in this strange situation of needing to bootstrap itself up. Okay? Right? And I think we should wonder, is that possible? And I think that's something Sellars is wondering about, right?
Yeah, right.
Is
Yeah.
that possible? Okay.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
and I think we're going to see in the next episode that this is not accidentally connected to the very problem of the philosophy of mind for Sellars.
Sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because think of it, like what's going on here. Sellars is saying, hey, what would it be to be distinctively humanly reflective, to be in the space of reasons? Okay. What would it be to max that out, to be in the space of reasons of the spaces of reasons, right? Okay. Is there any question? Can we make a case that there is an ultimate space of reasons like that? Well, that's the question, right? But note that all of that is really asking what is distinctive human thinking, right? All along, that's the question throughout all those levels, right? Is what is it to do this as a human thinker, right? So we've been implicitly hinting that we need to have a philosophy of mind to get philosophy off the ground, right?
Right on, right on. Mm-hmm.
And so that's like that's the 30,000-foot view of the essay, right? Now, then towards the end, talk about, you know, and this I think this will be important as this series unfolds, how archetypical Sellars' thinking is about this. Because I think really what you're getting here is I would be surprised if it's accidental. He's parodying a kind of a drama that unfolds in Plato, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, famously in the Phaedo, when Socrates, the archetypical philosopher for Plato, gives his autobiography when I was young. Oh, wait, let me come back. Sorry, I jumped in there. I jumped the shark. Okay.
That's all right. That's all right. Rewind the tape. All good.
So
Mm-hmm.
when Sellars says, like, okay, we have to like justify the notion that there is a stance towards the whole, right? And then he says, okay, it's not that the question isn't like, how do we fit biology together? How do we fit chemistry together? How do we fit, you know, literary criticism together? All this stuff. He says that there's a more fundamental question about the whole, right? Because he says we are confronted, and I think he thinks we've always been confronted with two fundamentally different, purportedly totalizing complete versions of what it is to be a human being in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one he calls the manifest image, and the other he calls the scientific image.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He thinks there are two competing absolute global perspectives, right? One looks at us and the world in terms of what he's going to call the manifest image, right? And the other looks at it in terms of what he's going to call the scientific image. And at the very tail end of the first section here, he gives them their names. Doesn't explain them. He gives them their names. Okay. So then for him, the philosophical question is, can there be a synthesis? Can there be a synoptic view that holds the manifest and the scientific image together?
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's the question. And then that becomes the theme of the essay. Okay. That's what he's going to run down throughout the whole essay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now I was all excited about the Plato thing. Okay. So now here's what it has to do with Plato is Plato, in his autobiography he ascribes to Socrates in the Phaedo, basically has Socrates define his own encounter with philosophy in precisely those terms. He has Socrates say, when I was young, I was very into the views of the natural scientists, right? At the time, these would have been the Greek pre-Socratic materialists, right? Okay, and something like a scientific view of the world, right? Not necessarily endorsing the science that they're giving there, right? And then he says, but now as I've matured, I prefer this other view in terms of mind, okay? Yeah. And it's clear what he has in mind there is the viewing the world in terms of a kind of cognitive teleology.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And in the Phaedo, you know, Plato has Socrates ultimately kind of like vindicate the mind view, the manifest view over, right, as like superior to the scientific view. So it's not where you don't get a synthesis, you don't get a synoptic view, you get like it's basically a kind of reduction, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But then when you go to Timaeus, Plato has Timaeus, not Socrates, say there he gives three different creation accounts or human origins accounts.
Yep.
The first one is in one translation is called the way of necessity, the work of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
As we'll see, is going to look a lot like Sellars' scientific image.
Yes.
The other is the way of the divine, right, or the way of the ideal, right, which is going to look a lot like the manifest image. And the final one, and the one that Timaeus says is the only complete one we could have, is the way of necessity and the way of divinity working together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you get in Plato's Timaeus kind of an intimation that there could be, and what we need is a synoptic view that puts the manifest and the scientific image together.
The synthesis, right? Yeah. And if you have not seen our series on the Timaeus, please do it, because we had a lot of fun with all those triangles.
And there's sort of like opposed positions in synthesis, like makes, kind of like my Hegelian tingles go through me a little bit, right? Okay, right. But I don't think that's necessarily accidental to Sellars. Okay, but my point at this point is just to see what he's done here. Is I think he's just given us the archetypical definition of philosophy and what its project is that was already present in the founder of the discipline with Plato.
Yeah, brilliant. Good. Is there okay? So sorry if I'm jumping the gun, but is this where you wanted to pause for the first part here, Jim, or are there more points?
Yeah. And so probably later this afternoon I'll start working on part 2, and it's gonna be 7 parts, man. I've committed.
No, that's great.
Time in the spring, right?
As the kids say, we're here for it. We're here for it, Professor. So no, appreciate you putting this content together. This is, of course, for the people, and this I think will be an awesome introduction. Again, not just to Sellars, an important philosophical figure, and this important essay, but again, framing philosophy of mind in a certain way that I think will be especially enlightening to people. So. Yeah, good stuff. In the meantime, I will encourage people to go read the full Substack here. I can probably take it off the screen now. Back to our ugly mugs. Head over to it's jdmadden.substack, right? That's the URL. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So check it out. If you're not already subscribed to Jim's Substack, please do that. Of course, I've got my own as well. And we're cooking up all sorts of things over there to kind of supplement the podcasts and just, I guess, entertain ourselves at various times as well. But that's the fun of Substack. So appreciate you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Please leave your questions and comments after the video. And Jim, anything else you want to say before we wrap this one up?
Hey, can we do one question I kind of want to do here?
Yeah, for sure.
The Let's Go Truth one. Do you see it?
Why do you call him Dr. Jim when you made fun of Jill Biden being called Dr. Biden?
I don't ask anybody to use my title, right? In fact, I think Kevin, who's watching right now, will tell you I actually often ask not to use the title, and I don't require my students to use it either, right? So
yeah. Did I make fun of the Bidens? Yeah. I probably did make fun of the Bidens at some point.
We didn't, right? Because I think the adherence of people with PhDs to the use of the title is like just silly, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things with Jim has. I don't know if you've insisted it, but you made very clear from our first acquaintance that, like, I'm Jim.
yeah. I just think the use of the title. I get why, like, a medical physician, we would call that person doctor, because it's very some situations where it's very important to know who the hell the doctor is, right? And like who's in charge of this thing, and like whose say goes, right? But I think insisting on the title, especially for a philosopher, is very odd, because I should not be appealing to authority, right? You know what I mean? And I'll admit, at a certain point in my career, when I was like young and insecure, I was like, I was into the title, right?
Is that I mean, this is kind of, I don't know. I always want to wade these waters carefully, but it does seem like the people who insist on it the most are generally the most insecure. You know what I mean? So
you're not wrong, I think, right? And right. You can even look at disciplines about this, right? But anyway, but I don't do that. I don't, right? But I mean, I do say, like, so increasingly, like, if you've got a syllabus of mine, like a recent syllabus, and it's under, oddly have to put my name on my syllabus, like instructor name. I'll have sometimes just Jim Madden. I'll just have Madden, right? Okay. And if a kid calls me Jim, I don't correct them. If they call me Dr. Madden, I don't correct them either, because I have colleagues, and it means a lot to some of them, and I don't necessarily want to pick a fight over that. But I'm not in the title, right? And I think it's kind of funny when you see like a brand new faculty member like hanging their diploma on their wall of their office. I'm like, look, man, everybody got one of those around here, right? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Kevin has a quick one.
I don't mean to be snotty to Let's Go Truth there, but I just wanted to point out I do not insist on the title at all. Yeah.
Right. Kevin says, I hear chemistry as soon as I join. This is going to be one where we watch the beginning, the end for sure. We didn't talk that much about chemistry, so don't.
Yeah, sorry, Kevin. Yeah.
Might want to readjust your, expectations on this episode. It's more of a
probably because I definitely do not have a PhD in chemistry. So.
Marty says, just want to say hello to a few people here. Marty says, only 20 minutes late this time. Well, good to have you. Better late than never. We don't really have much of a truancy for this class, right?
Yeah, that's no. Yeah. I also don't put people down for being late. So.
Don't worry, you're not going and not getting any marks next to your name. Just glad you're here. David said made it through stream. Let's go. Hope you guys enjoy it. And David's also insisting on Dr. Jim. Dr. Jim. Right.
I just imagine if we met at a cookout, right, and I said to another grown person, "My name's Jim Madden, but you can call me Dr. Madden." I'm the biggest jerk in the world.
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah. I'm not gonna harp on all that. Fortunately, the vast majority of people I've met and know are sort of like you, at least in the philosophy world, right? They're like, I'm Jim, I'm Phil, I'm Paul, whatever. And then, if whatever. All right, that's good for now. Hit up the Substacks, gentle listeners. We got some more. Jim is on break right now, right? So we're probably going to see a little extra Jim Madden action this week. That's
a little something going here, yeah, right?
A little something.
What we might do is, I think last year on Easter Monday we did that thing on the resurrection. It'd be kind of fun to maybe revisit that, something like that.
Yeah, man. Let's plan on it. Plan on it. Monday's a good day. But by the way, for those who say I don't spoil my wife, explain this new Easter gift I got her here.
What do you got there? Is that a boombox?
It's a new guitar amp.
Nice. Lucky girl.
Lucky girl. All right, guys. We'll catch you next time. Peace.